Well, welcome back to yet another VIA Visionaries. Thank you all for joining. This is, it's September, back to school. So we thought we would have a little bit back to school special edition. Joining us today, we have Bhaskar Chakravorti, who is at Tufts, and I would say has such a long and storied career in so many things. Usually these are 30 minutes. It would take 29 minutes for me just to go through all the things Bhaskar has done. But we'll start with just you are the current Dean of Global Business at the Fletcher School at Tufts University, local to us. And so we're really excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us, Bhaskar.
Absolutely, Colin. Great to be here. And part of my storied career was working with Colin in the past. So that's part of my career I'm most proud of.
Oh, that is it. Oh my gosh. We're going to put comments in the bottom here about hearts about how a little bromance brewing. Well, thank you. I do remember many times. So you were the author of a great book called The Slow Pace of Fast Change, right? One of the favorite most people don't remember graphs or charts, but I remember the dice framework, and I remember you also had this Demi Moore's law, right, in your book, which we'll put in the notes something about that as well. But we at VIA, we love math and we love a good pun, so that way it's kind of a famous story around here.
And we all love Demi Moore, so
who doesn't love Demi Moore, right? So except for that one movie that one time, but otherwise, generally we're pretty good.
Yeah, there you go.
Terrific. Well, you have had this storied career, and that runs through business, it runs through academia, you're a published author. One of the things that is a theme that runs through many of your different parts of your career is around digital inclusion. VIA's mission is around cleaner, safer, more equitable communities. The idea of digital inclusion sounds great. It's actually a term that not a lot of people maybe actually know of. Could you tell us a little bit about what does that mean to you, and why is it important as a theme? What's made you focus in that area?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in the role of technology, as a force of societal change. And when we say technology intervenes on our day-to-day lives, it can intervene in many ways. It could be a multiplier, or it can be a divider. And a question that has always intrigued me is, so where is technology on that spectrum? Is it a multiplier, is it a divider? We know it's kind of a little bit of both. And and how does the needle move based on new waves of technological progress, and what can we do to move the needle in the right direction of multiplication rather than division? And so having kind of given you a bit of a glib response to why digital inclusion, one of the things I was struck by are some of the statistics around digital devices themselves. So there are roughly as many smartphones on the planet as there are people, which is a pretty impressive statistic. About 7 billion or so. Not that everybody has a smartphone, but numerically we have as many phones as people. That's an interesting commentary on the state of advancement of human civilization. Now, another commentary on the state of advancement of human civilization, or lack thereof, is that there are more smartphones than there are toilets or access to clean water.
Huh.
So you can say, well, people have cell phones, but they don't have access to some of the basics that we take for granted in many parts of the world. And then I started investigating further as to, okay, if there are this many smartphones around the world, and it just doesn't have to be smartphones, in any kind of a device that allows you to communicate with people who are not immediately in your vicinity, and then that has all kinds of ramifications in terms of people's access to information, connection, and a whole bunch of other things. And so I was trying to figure out, okay, who has access and who doesn't, and also when one says you have access, what does that really mean? If you might have a phone in your hand, but what do you do with it? About 2.5 billion people in the world actually don't have access to phones or the internet. So despite the fact that you have as many phones as people, not everybody has the device in their hands, so not everybody has access to the internet. We are celebrating, roughly speaking, the 50th anniversary of the invention of the idea of the internet. The first paper that kind of conceived of the code that underlies the internet is about 50 years old. So now we have 2.5 billion people who are missing, and then even among the people who have access, it turns out about 260 million fewer women have access to the internet than men. So there are all kinds of asymmetries in terms of just having access. But then once you go beyond the access, what do you do with it? How sophisticated are you in using these devices? It turns out that people in many parts of the world are using the device for very, very productive reasons, because they've never had this kind of connectivity, and suddenly it gives them an opportunity to, receive payments, get information about, where prices are in different parts of their community, and then, run a business and so on. And for others, they're using it, for somewhat unproductive purposes. They're spending all their time scrolling on WhatsApp and then consuming information that's not, terribly relevant, and then they're ending up probably making very bad decisions for themselves and their communities. So there are all kinds of implications in terms of this asymmetry. And so it's a very long-winded answer to your question about digital inclusion and why I found that fascinating, because there's so many different dimensions to it. It breaks across socioeconomic lines, it breaks across gender lines, it breaks across rural-urban lines, and so on. And I'll say one more thing, and then I'll shut up.
Actually, I got 6 more questions. So it's all good.
Yeah. So alongside this, there's sort of a fascinating phenomenon that I still haven't been able to completely crack the code on, which is the state of global inequality. Now, global inequality overall is a bit of a paradox, and we are right now in an election year where the idea of inequality is central to all the rhetoric and reality that's swirling all around us. It's the inequalities that are kind of the number one issue on the table. Everybody's saying, why hasn't Kamala Harris or Trump, spoken about policy? And usually policy is a code word for, what are you going to do, to me, for me, for my kitchen table issues. And a large part of this depends on, where you are in that inequality spectrum. And then the other issue that seems to come up constantly is, immigration. There are all these immigrants at the borders who are about to kind of, break down the fences and do horrible things to us and to our dogs and cats. And so a large part of that has to do with inequalities across countries.
Right.
So there's a lot of pressure from poorer countries to go into the richer countries and then, do something there. So I was fascinated by the notion of inequalities and how that manifests around the world. It turns out that inequalities have grown within countries, and global inequalities actually decreased in the last 30 years. So there's a paradox. On the one hand, within countries it's grown, whether it's in the developed countries like the United States or developing countries like India and China, but also because large numbers of people in countries like India and China have been lifted out of extreme poverty, overall the world is actually less unequal, right, which is kind of a weird situation. We never think about that as much. But then the third aspect to this global inequality paradox is that there is a bottom billion that has been left out altogether. And this is, people in sub-Saharan Africa and largely. So there's all these different things going on in inequalities, and a big part of these changes have been brought about because of of several factors. One is globalization. The second is the rise of the middle class in big populated countries, and the third is the growth of the digital economy. And the digital economy has grown 2.5 times that of the regular economy, and that's been a huge force multiplier in terms of reducing global inequalities. And my big question is, where do we go next? What's happening around the corner? And around the corner, the big force that we all are aware of is artificial intelligence, and how that's going to affect life and work around the world. And my the patterns that I can see is that it is actually going to make all these inequalities worse. It's going to expand inequalities within countries, and it's going to expand inequalities across countries. So all the progress that we made in the last 30 years, we're going to be reversing it in the next 30.
Okay, there was a lot to unpack in that statement. So if I pick up on a couple of quick things there, which first, very compelling, right? With these inequality. And first, we always learn something on any particular episode here, and this is no exception. Something we had a gentleman by the name of Stan Byers, who's with USAID, on a few months ago, something Stan said and reminded us of is the basic facts that Somerville, Medford, Boston, we are in a bubble, and 85% of the world's population is not like us, they're elsewhere. And you're kind of, alluding to that. There's this bottom billion that's been left out of many environments. So digital inclusion is fascinating. How is it important in those environments, right? For when you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you could argue, well, food, shelter, security, those are basic things, right? And is digital inclusion rank as, I can make an argument either way. I'm curious about your point of view, given your expertise in the area.
Yeah, so we always think about access to digital technologies and applications as it comes after access to a roof above our heads and food on the table and that kind of stuff. But most of us, you take your phone away from anyone in the room, and let's just watch them for the next 60 seconds. You can see their heart rate going up, right? So so it's clear that as far as apart from the 2.5 billion who actually don't have those phones, for everybody else, this has become an essential part of their life, for better or for worse. Second is, particularly during a global phenomenon like the pandemic, we realized that those who could afford to do it, essentially they tried to create a facsimile of their regular life using their screens. So digitization and the access to digital became clearly a very important part of people's lives. Most importantly, for children who had to attend school and at least maintain some continuity in their education, and even if it was flawed, the screen was critical. Now, when we say the screen was critical, if you're in Somerville or Cambridge, you put up a laptop, either your own or your parents, and off you go. If you are in a poorer neighborhood, you may not have access to internet in your home, so you go to a parking lot of a Taco Bell, and you flip over a laptop and you piggyback off of the Wi-Fi of the Taco Bell. If there's a public library that kept its Wi-Fi open, then you went to the parking lot of the public library. So you could see the differences already, even within the United States, as this kind of went on. If you go to poorer countries like in India, the single biggest school system during the pandemic in India, and we studied this, was WhatsApp. So kids were getting lessons on WhatsApp, and that's how they learned. So there are variations in terms of digital technology serving people in different parts of the world, but it has essentially become a critical part of, I don't know where it stands in terms of Maslow's hierarchy. If I don't have a glass of water, I won't survive. But then once I've had the glass of water, I do need, access to information and the other things that technology, provides us.
Yeah. Well, two things. When you just saying you were going to take my phone away for a minute, my heart rate went up. So yeah, already. And there's probably a point we can come back to later, which is there's the potential, I heard you say, of people earning income, and that maybe the cell phone or the device helps you earn enough for that glass of water, for clean water. So there's these are not necessarily not necessarily sequential, right? They may be cyclical or related in different ways. So
yeah, I mean, I'll just give you an example of how technology, when productively deployed, can make an enormous difference to people's lives, right? And so let's take an example of a smallholder farmer in sub-Saharan Africa. About 50% of their crop gets destroyed by pests. And depending on where you are, what kind of crop you grow, that 50% could go up to 75%. So just imagine the income loss for that person, right? So now it turns out that you could actually reduce that 50% crop loss by at least a half, if not more, if you just knew how to intervene at the right time with some homegrown ingredients. And there are apps and these are apps that don't require a huge amount of sophistication, which pretty much you take a feature phone which has a camera. You take a picture of the plant that has the infestation, and you upload it on the app, and it'll come back and tell you what the disease is, and it tells you in your native language what you should do, some really straightforward homegrown remedies, and it takes that 50% down by a notch. And if you have access to better remedies, it takes it down even further. So now imagine somebody who's working is essentially on subsistence wage. Their wages gets doubled, and that translates into them being able to afford a whole bunch of things, and that whole bunch of things translates into not just food on the table, but the kids can actually go to school instead of working on the farms, and it has implications across gender lines, and sort of helps particularly the women in the household become more productive, and then that translates into multiplier effects, and before you know it, that one technological intervention actually has a much longer tail. Now, this is not to say this is a silver bullet that sort of solves everything, but there is a multiplier aspect of technology, which is really quite fascinating.
It's not to be glib about it, but it turns out for poverty education, it turns out there is an app for that, right? There is opportunity. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, we're being a little old-fashioned by calling it there's an app for that these days.
That's dating.
There's an AI for that.
Got it. There's an AI. Yeah. Noted. Yeah. We'll do that in post. Somebody will fix it. I'll speak in Scarlett Johansson's voice for the rest of it. So, okay, one of the things I'm hearing is there is, in that particular instance, necessity is the mother of invention, right? There's a need for food, right? There's a need for and so there's innovation around being able to solve for that. Something you've written about and have spoken about is, you're at an American university, our theme for back to school. American universities are kind of the leading edge, still the leading edge around innovation in many, many ways, right? And do you, given the let's talk about that. So, do you still see that continuing? Do you think the need and invention are going to be related? How do you see that playing out, especially related to, is digital inclusion even a topic? Right?
Yeah. So if you just think about where innovation is coming from, and let's take innovation. Obviously, kind of has many faces. So there's innovation at the very high end, where you're constantly building a bigger, better, AI, a generative AI model that can do more things, and doing fewer crazy things while doing more things, that kind of stuff. And then there's innovation like essentially figuring out what pest to have on my plant, and thereby doing the right intervention. That's like what I call crappy AI or crappy tech, really low tech stuff, but can have a massive swing, a small intervention with a massive swing in terms of the outcome for the people who are affected. That's also innovation in many ways, much more meaningful innovation than building a much bigger generative AI model, because it's unclear how much of a productivity boost that's going to have. That said, if you think about innovation in a traditional way, and let's use the example of artificial intelligence as kind of one of the major cutting edge of innovative development these days, much of that has shifted to the private sector, largely because frankly the U.S. public sector has fallen down. Everybody jumps up and down calling AI a national priority, but Congress is not willing to put their money behind it, and not only money, Congress is not willing to do anything in terms of setting guardrails and regulations for it. They basically spent a year and a half sort of studying the subject, talking to 160 experts, and then came up with a Zippo, a report which basically kind of says, okay, we're going to kick the can down the road. So as far as government is concerned, it's sort of fallen behind, and because government falls behind, universities fall behind, because universities, a large part of what they can do is enabled by grants from the federal government and some of the sources. So it's the private sector that takes the lead, and now there's a natural reason for the private sector to essentially throw the insane amounts of money that we are seeing behind innovation, and I'm using air quotes because innovation, to my mind, translates into a productivity boost somewhere in terms of what you're doing, and it's unclear to me that we are going to get that kind of a boost relative to the amount of investments that's going in. And what we're seeing right now is essentially companies like Google seeing their core business model, probably the most successful business model in the history of human civilization, now threatened. And and companies like Microsoft and OpenAI smelling blood in the water. So tens of billions of dollars are being spent on this frontier of innovation, and obviously it will have reverberations down the road. It'll have implications for all of us, but for now I think that's where a lot of innovative work is being done. And of course universities are playing a part. They're doing what they're doing, but so much of this is now shifted into private hands.
So that's lots of good fodder there. For, I won't make any Sam Altman, jokes about the use of AI in this area, but that does bring us to the private sector. And you have, in addition to your role at the Fletcher School, another of your roles as senior advisor for digital inclusion at the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth. So what role does business have a role in digital inclusion specifically versus, the broader AI? When people smell blood in the water, it's clear where business is going to play a role. But for digital inclusion,
so businesses have the ability to scale up products and services and applications, and we have there are massive societal needs, whether it's inclusion or a whole bunch of other, if you just go to the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a gigantic UN project which names sort of every problem known to mankind that needs to be solved. So there's a long list of goals there, and you could sort of check each one of them and kind of say, what can digital do, to help make advances on each of them. And then the natural question is, who is best positioned to make those advances? Because guess what? We are actually seriously falling behind in getting to those goals. Originally they were set for 2030, but we're supposed to meet these goals. We are way, way behind. We were way behind before the pandemic. Post-pandemic, we're even further behind. There is no way that governments are going to reach into their pockets and put the kind of money needed to make those advances. So then who's the next best actor in the space? And it's really business. And then you have to ask the question, why would business do this? Why would business invest in an app that allows a smallholder farmer in Kenya to be able to detect the pest on their plants? Well, businesses might do it either because of some marketing fluffy thing like that, or that's not largely going to be scaled. It's not going to be terribly meaningful. They'll do enough to get a nice photograph and stick it on a brochure. But they're likely to do it at scale or in a meaningful way if it aligns with their business purposes. So if I'm, give you an example, if I'm a company like Olam, for instance, it is essentially a food trader. It sort of brings coffee and cocoa or cashews out of Africa and then sort of processes it, and then it then distributed by the big food companies. For them, it's actually great to have crops that aren't destroyed because of pests. So if I can get those kinds of companies, and not just Olam, but lots of others, I just picked one, that have a business interest in aligning with many of these kind of inclusion-related initiatives, I could potentially get a much more scaled intervention. And I could have the discipline that business brings to these issues, a certain amount of measurability and accountability. And then, of course, we have to be mindful of the fact that all of this needs to be done within a framework of regulatory oversight and some collaboration with the local communities, because you can't just sort of walk in and say, hey, you know what, I'll fix your pest your pest problem. This has to be something that has to be done with the trust of the people involved. So I do think businesses have a transformational capability. It helps business and it helps the community if they can get it right. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is that for a lot of businesses, it's sort of these things go in and out in cycles. We've just seen a cycle of a lot of enthusiasm around inclusive business, ESG, and now we're sort of on the downside of that. So there are lots of other issues to be addressed there, but theoretically, I do think there's an enormous role for businesses to play.
Well, and you used a specific word there to pick up on, which is, you said it requires is trust. Right? And one of the themes in your writing around for MasterCard has been digital trust, and it'd be helpful to hear a little bit about, is digital trust related to digital inclusion? Are they, reinforcing? Are they? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. We think about trust. Now, what the hell is trust? We all know. I know what trust is. Then you pin the person down. Can you define it? Then we'll all kind of hem and haw, and we'll come up with some sort of a definition, or maybe it's just an example. But I say the best definition of trust is trust when you don't see it. So when it's missing, you know exactly
the
trust
opposite
is
of Potter Stewart.
Exactly. It's like the opposite of pornography.
Yeah.
You know it when you see it.
Yeah.
Trust is you know it when you don't see it.
Yeah.
So now you can say, okay, so what is digital trust? And I think we have actually been able to create a definition of digital trust, and we've also measured it, and we have calibrated it across a large number of countries and identified where digital trust is high, where it is low, what kind of societal and behavioral aspects that connects with. But digital trust is enormously important for many reasons, not the least of which being the fact that if I were to just go back to this notion of AI and the money we're spending on AI, people are going to there's going to be returns on those investments if people adopt these new technologies. And adoption is gated by the amount of trust I have in the system. So if I don't trust this AI thing, I will not use it, right? So then there's a natural question of saying, okay, can I break this down? Why is there distrust in a new form of digital technology or digital application? And in the case of AI, just as an example, there are many reasons why people don't trust AI. For one, if I ask it to write a paragraph, there could be errors. So if I ask it to write a paragraph, it may not necessarily have anything distinctive. It sort of seems formulaic. So there could be a bunch of things there. If I ask it to write a paragraph, it's not just errors. It could just hallucinate and do super crazy things. If I ask it to write a paragraph, suddenly I realize it's actually pretty damn good. So it might lead me to wonder, instead of hiring 10 people in my organization, I hire only 3. So then I lose trust in it because this might displace, people in my organization. I ask it to write a paragraph and I say, well, wait a minute. In the process of writing that paragraph, I have just used up a massive amount of my carbon allocation because, this has a tremendous environmental imprint. So we start thinking about all the different aspects of digital technology that gives us pause. All of that folds into trust. During the pandemic, we used digital technology because we had no other option. But now, when we have all these other options, and not just physical alternatives, but alternative forms of digital technology, trust is a really important factor to be mindful of. So when people invest in digital products, we also need to figure out how to invest in building trust and winning that trust of the consumer, because that's going to accelerate adoption. And I'll say one more thing in terms of digital inclusion. One of the patterns that we've seen increasingly is that communities for whom digital technology is relatively new, they tend to trust it more, and which is both great and it is also a reason to worry. So what that means is I have a phone in my hand. Suddenly, I can receive payments and I can run a business that I could never do before because I'd rely on cash and all that kind of stuff. So and I trust using the phone because suddenly it's giving me this power that I never had before. But at the same time, I have that phone in my hand and I get a WhatsApp message which says, you know what, there are people out there who are about to kill people who look like you. And then that piece of misinformation becomes a way to destroy the social fabric. So that trustworthiness of the phone for somebody for whom digital technology is new is a very, very powerful thing. It's a very dangerous thing.
So, so there are a number of themes there to pick up on. I'd say that we've talked a lot. You've used a lot of analogies about AI, and when people talk about trust, something maybe not as fashionable. A few years ago, everybody talked about blockchain because it was about trustless sort of technology. And blockchain had, particularly in cryptocurrencies world, has been all about sort of digital currencies, and payments, and some of these aspects. Do you see that playing a role, a positive role, a negative role? Like all technologies, there's probably some plus and minus, but what are the roles for digital or cryptocurrencies in this space of trust and digital inclusion?
So I'm speaking personally. I'm a crypto skeptic. So I'm not there. That this is going to be.
We should say crypto. We've also means cryptography. We're pro cryptography.
Okay,
but the currency part.
Cryptocurrency skeptic. I should clarify. And I think a large part of the move towards, at least if you just think about, so for one, there are all the cryptocurrencies and variety of different reasons why they kind of had their ups and downs, and right now we're sort of in this lull period. But then there is the whole kind of the digital currencies, which are sort of backed by governments and other movement, where governments were trying to, getting worried that here's this completely stateless, form of currency that's about to take over. So they needed to get ahead of it. So there was this competitive urge for governments to step in and create their own digital currencies. A large part of that was also led by the fact that countries like China were making big moves on that, and some of that momentum was also slowed. So I think we are a long way away. And even though the United States government has, done a few things here and there, it's relatively, limited experiments. And I guess at the last count, over 60 to 70 countries that have some form of a digital currency in play, along with all these private cryptocurrencies that are going around. Eventually, I'm sure they will have an impact in terms of they will find their way into the overall payment system. But my sense is a long, long way off.
Yeah. Okay. Well, bring us back maybe to we're coming up to the end of our half hour here. I want maybe a final question. You, in your role, Fletcher School, you're an influencer of young minds, maybe some older minds too. And I wonder if you have any words of advice or wisdom for what individuals can do, students or otherwise, to in their lives or careers, or as they are making choices to improve digital inclusion, right, to make a difference in that area.
Yeah. So this is what I tell our students is that speaking of young and old, these things are all relative. But I do know that my generation has handed their generation, quite a mess, and a mess in many dimensions. And which is both bad news and good news. I mean, it's bad news because it's a mess. Good news is that, hey, if you do have the tools to clean up the mess, you'll be employed forever. And so now my job is to figure out how to give you the tools.
Right.
And there are many tools, and there's no one way to go about it because there are many messes to be dealt with. But one really powerful tool is this kind of the whole arsenal of digital technologies, and because it gives you a massive amount of leverage. If you can find the right place to, tilt a lever or two, you could actually have, make a big difference.
So if you get if you put the fulcrum in the right place,
exactly,
it turns out you can move the world.
Yeah, I mean, and I keep coming back to this, the farmer and the pest example, because it's just one example, but there are lots of others where a small change, a small intervention can make a big difference. So I think that's if you use that almost as a metaphor for where can I find a similar thing that connects with my education, my passion, my the part of the world, the kind of area that I want to work on. I think the sky's the limit. And unfortunately, there are lots of opportunities to do that. And I think, and the younger generation, by definition, they're digital natives. I consider myself a digital refugee, and so as a digital native, you're far more facile, with these things. And so there is a lot of hope for particularly digital technologies in playing a very, very important and powerful role in helping clean up some part of the mess. We're not going to clean up the whole thing because the messes are getting bigger and bigger.
Well, I'm glad to end on a hopeful note. I think there are lots of it, but I'm glad that there's those opportunities exist. Bhaskar, thank you so much for taking the time to come in physically in person today, not doing it digitally, and appreciate all the contributions you're making to the world, and look forward to reading more your next book, your next set of publications. So thank you again for coming in today.
Absolutely, and thank you for all the terrific work that you're doing at VIA.
Happy to help the world. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you.